What if everything we believe about the beginning of civilization is wrong? What if our story didn't begin in Mesopotamia, or along the fertile banks of the Nile, but in a world long buried beneath ice and ocean? Imagine an age erased so completely that even memory itself forgot it had once existed. An age before the ice swallowed coastlines, before the myths of flood and fire became metaphors for extinction. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I'm doing here. And tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it where you are? There are moments in history where silence feels deliberate, when the sands cover not only ruins but intent. You can sense it, standing before the stones of Göbekli Tepe, a structure so impossibly old that it breaks every rule of human development. 12,000 years ago, when humankind was supposed to be hunting and gathering, someone built a sanctuary of carved pillars, each weighing more than 10 tons, engraved with foxes, vultures, scorpions, and serpents. And then, they buried it. Every block, every wall, sealed beneath earth by the very hands that raised it. It is as if the builders had wished to hide it from the future, or from the past that might one day remember. Archaeologists called Göbekli Tepe the world's first temple. Yet even that title feels too small. It is not merely a monument. It is a contradiction, a whisper from a forgotten intelligence. Its carvings are not random. They follow patterns, constellations perhaps, the rhythm of the stars across precession cycles. Some researchers, like Klaus Schmidt, believed it represented an entire cosmology. Others, like Andrew Collins, noted that its enclosures seem aligned with Deneb in the Cygnus constellation, suggesting a sky-oriented theology. But that would mean these people not only built in stone, they built with knowledge of the heavens. And where does such knowledge come from? The mainstream narrative insists civilization is a product of agriculture, which began around 10,000 BCE. But Göbekli Tepe predates farming by centuries. There was no wheat, no cities, no writing, no pottery, and yet there was geometry, there was astronomy, there was art of astonishing sophistication. Who taught them? Or what were they remembering? When one travels to other parts of the world, similar whispers appear beneath the soil and sea. Off the coast of Japan, near Yonaguni, lies a step structure that looks almost architectural. Terraces, columns, and platforms descending into the blue silence. Geologists debate its nature, erosion, or craftsmanship. But the sharp angles and deliberate symmetry defy chaos. Its orientation matches cardinal directions, like an underwater ziggurat. Local legends tell of a city called Mu drowned long ago when the sea rose to reclaim it. Science says the ocean level climbed at the end of the Ice Age, around 11,000 years ago, the same moment Göbekli Tepe's builders stirred in Anatolia. Coincidence, perhaps, or a rhythm too vast for our brief memories. Another fragment lies in the North Sea, Doggerland, a once fertile plain that connected Britain to Europe. Beneath those cold waters, archaeologists have found bones of mammoths, tools of hunters, traces of rivers and forests now drowned. Doggerland vanished as glaciers melted, taking with it whatever cultures once thrived there. Some theorize it was home to Mesolithic societies that may have transitioned toward early agriculture before they vanished. Others wonder if that flood, the same one remembered in Sumerian, Hebrew, and Greek myth, was a global trauma, preserved through generations as legend. It is strange, isn't it, how myth echoes geology? The flood of Utnapishtim, the deluge of Noah, the sinking of Atlantis. Each story warns of waters rising without mercy, of gods punishing hubris, of knowledge lost beneath waves. But what if those stories were not allegory, but memory, distorted by time, surviving only as symbols in the dream of later civilizations? In Turkey, near the shores of Lake Van, ancient inscriptions speak of kingdoms predating recorded Urartu. In Peru, Beneath Incan foundations lie older stones, larger, smoother, fused as if by forgotten technology. In Egypt, granite blocks quarried hundreds of kilometers away fit so precisely you cannot slip a blade between them. And under these monuments, there are often tunnels, sealed, as though someone hid not treasure, but history. Civilization, as we define it, begins around 5,000 years ago. But fragments like these challenge that neat chronology. They imply layers, interruptions, and resets. If humanity reached a certain height once before, not of technology as we know it, but of understanding, then something must have shattered it. Something wiped the slate clean, leaving any ruins too inconvenient for the textbooks. It is easy to dismiss anomalies as coincidence, as erosion, as exaggeration. Yet when enough coincidences align, they start to sound like patterns. The shape of the stones, the orientation toward the stars, the repetition of flood myths across continents, they all point to a civilization that either existed or was remembered as having existed before the Ice Age ended. And perhaps that is what disturbs us most. The possibility that the human story did not begin with progress, but with recovery. We're told the Ice Age was a time of brutal simplicity, of mammoths and survival, not architecture and cosmology. But ice is also a veil. It conceals more than it reveals. Beneath miles of glacier could rest entire chapters of our story, frozen not just in time but in deliberate amnesia. And as the ice retreats, in Greenland, in Antarctica, on the mountains of Alaska, it reveals things we were never meant to see. Forests buried for tens of thousands of years, fossilized microbes, even strange geometric ridges beneath the southern pole. The past is thawing, and it seems to be whispering something. Maybe it isn't that we lack evidence, but that we lack the permission to believe it. Academia, bound by caution, clings to linearity, the comforting thought that history is a straight line of progress. But nature moves in cycles, growth, collapse, rebirth. Why should civilization be different? Perhaps there was a time before the ice. Perhaps we once rose to knowledge, only to fall into silence. And perhaps all that remains are the stones, the myths, and the haunting intuition that we've been here before. The wind moves across the ruins as if remembering too. The night sky, still patterned by the same stars that shone upon those ancient builders, stares back, silent, eternal, indifferent. Somewhere beneath the soil an older truth sleeps, waiting for us to remember what we once were and what we chose to forget. The sea has always hidden things we were never meant to see. Beneath its still surface, memories sleep. Mountains that once touched sunlight, valleys where rivers once carved paths through green plains, and cities that might have echoed with human voices before the ice retreated. If the first civilization existed before the Ice Age, then the ocean itself may be its grave, its silence, a kind of mercy, its depth, a kind of forgetting. Along the coast of Japan near Yonaguni Island, divers discovered what appeared to be a submerged monument, a colossal staircase of sandstone terraces rising from the ocean floor, sharp edges, perfectly straight lines, perfectly. Angular platforms that mimic the geometry of a pyramid. Some say it's a natural formation shaped by currents and time. Others, like marine geologist Masaki Kimura, argue it was once a city, built over 10,000 years ago, before the sea level rose more than 100 meters. He mapped roads, gateways, and even carvings that look like symbols or faces. The debate continues, caught between science and something deeper, the discomfort of realizing that we might not be the first. Far across the world in the waters near Cuba, sonar scans in 2001 revealed massive stone structures, resting 2,000 feet below the surface, blocks the size of small houses, arranged in precise geometric patterns. The Canadian researcher Polina Zalitsky suggested they could be ancient ruins, but official explanations soon turned vague. A misunderstanding, a misreading, geological trickery. The story disappeared into quiet denial, as if too much sunlight had fallen on it, because if those shapes were truly man-made, they would predate every known civilization. They would force us to rewrite the beginning. Again, the pattern repeats. The Bimini Road in the Bahamas, a pathway of rectangular limestone slabs stretching nearly half a kilometer under shallow turquoise water. Local legend claims it's the remnant of Atlantis. Scientists argue the stones fractured naturally, though their alignment and regularity seem almost purposeful. Even skeptics admit the formation dates to around 10,000 BCE, precisely when the last ice age ended. The timing is inconvenient. Sea levels then rose catastrophically, swallowing entire coastal plains within a few thousand years. But few thousand means generations upon generations watching their world dissolve. The melting ice sheets released torrents that drowned what might have been early centers of culture. Trade hubs, sanctuaries, and settlements built where rivers met the sea. And when the sea claimed them, their stories became myths of punishment and loss. The Great Flood, the drowning of Lemuria, the forgotten homeland beyond the waves. In the Bay of Cambay, off India's western coast, another anomaly emerged in 2002. Sonar revealed a grid-like pattern of foundations beneath 120 feet of murky water. Streets, walls, even possible staircases. Artifacts dredged from the site included pottery shards and tools carbon dated to nearly 9,500 years ago. That's older than Sumer, older than Egypt, older than the supposed dawn of civilization itself. Indian archaeologists called it Dwarka, the legendary city of Krishna said to have been swallowed by the sea. Others dismissed it as coincidence, but the sonar images remain quiet, undeniable patterns lying beneath sediment. If these ruins truly predate the known timeline, then the story of human development changes. Civilization might not have begun once but many times, each erased by rising tides and remembered only through whispers. A lost maritime culture perhaps, one that thrived when coastlines stretched hundreds of miles farther than today, when the Black Sea was still a freshwater lake, and the Persian Gulf a fertile plain, when the Mediterranean basin, before its flooding, may have held valleys filled with rivers and lakes. Every flood myth might be a regional memory of the same event. The sea returning to reclaim the land. To our ancestors, it would have seemed divine wrath. To geology, it was inevitability. To us, it may be evidence of what came before. The most haunting part of these underwater enigmas is not what they show, but what they imply. If a civilization once lived at those now submerged coasts, they must have understood the world's rhythms, the sky, the sea, the seasons. Perhaps their temples faced the rising sun because they trekked not only time but survival. Perhaps their myths were maps, warning of cycles yet to come. In Egypt's oldest inscriptions, the flood is not described as a single disaster, but a recurring one, a returning of the waters. The same word appears in early Sumerian texts. The deluge, yes, but also a cycle of cleansing, as if history itself were designed to be reset. Civilizations rise, reach knowledge, and are washed away. We rebuild, forgetting what came before. Even now we trace the ocean floor with machines and algorithms, mapping it like a memory we are afraid to confront. Each scan reveals more strange regularities. Terraces in the Caribbean, walls in the Mediterranean, patterns in the Gulf of Cumbat. And each time, we hesitate. Because if we admit they were built, we admit we've lost something. Not just ruins, but origin. Scientists remind us that the ocean erodes and deceives, that waves can mimic design, that symmetry can emerge from accident. Yet isn't that the essence of mystery? The point where nature and intent blur so completely that the boundary itself becomes sacred. Imagine for a moment a people who lived before the glaciers began to die. They would have watched the first floods swallow their harbors, their temples, their ancestors' graves. They would have fled inland, carrying fragments of knowledge, astronomy, architecture, ritual. Perhaps those refugees built Göbekli Tepe to preserve memory through stone when their coasts were gone. Perhaps they carved their gods into rock to remind the future that they had existed. And then, perhaps, they too vanished. Not because they were ignorant, but because the earth shifted, and no amount of wisdom could stop the water from coming. The tides keep their secrets well. We sail above them, never realizing that beneath the hulls of our ships lies a drowned prehistory, the first age of humanity, erased by its own planet. Every wave that touches the shore might once have touched a wall of stone. Every grain of sand might have been part of a city's floor, and every myth we tell about lost lands might simply be the memory of our own amnesia. The sea does not lie. It forgets slowly, in silence. And beneath that silence something still waits. A memory too vast to fit our timelines, too real to fit our comfort. What will happen when we finally listen to what the ocean has been trying to tell us? In the highlands of southeastern Turkey, where wind and dust whisper across the ancient hills, lies a mound that once defied belief. Göbekli Tepe, the potbelly hill. It looks ordinary from a distance, like any other rise of earth concealing the bones of forgotten villages. But buried beneath that hill is something that rewrites the story of humanity. A temple older than agriculture, older than writing, older than the wheel. Built by people who were not supposed to exist yet, at least not like this, the stones rise like sentinels from another world. Massive T-shaped pillars arranged in circles, each etched with the silent language of animals. Foxes, vultures, cranes, serpents, lions. Their bodies twist around the stone as if frozen in ritual motion. Some of the carvings seem alive, others menacing, some merely watching. Archaeologists date the site to around 9600 BCE, nearly 12,000 years old. That makes it 7 millennia older than the Great Pyramid of Giza. And yet, the builders had no metal, no domesticated beasts, no cities. They had only stone, will, and knowledge. Whoever built Göbekli Tepe knew geometry. The pillars are not random. They form perfect enclosures with precise orientations. Many align with celestial events, solstices, star risings, and perhaps something older still, the slow drift of the heavens known as precession. The most prominent enclosure, known as Enclosure D, points toward the constellation of Cygnus, the celestial swan that flies along the Milky Way. Andrew Collins and Graham Hancock have both suggested that this was no coincidence. In ancient mythology, Cygnus was a gateway, a point where souls ascended to the realm of the gods. Was Göbekli Tepe a map of that cosmic journey? The carvings seem to say yes. One pillar shows a vulture carrying what looks like a human head. Another shows a scorpion under a crescent, perhaps the constellation Scorpius. The vulture stone, as it's now called, might depict the sky around 10,750 BCE, the precise time when the Younger Dryas cold period began, an age of sudden catastrophe. If true, this would mean the builders recorded an event they witnessed, maybe a cosmic one, a meteor storm or impact. How could hunter-gatherers have such astronomical awareness? Some scholars suggest it's impossible, that they could not have built such a site without agriculture and complex social organization. Yet Göbekli Tepe seems to have created agriculture, not the other way around. Its builders gathered there to perform rituals, to carve meaning into stone, and perhaps to mourn a lost world. Over time, their descendants learned to farm nearby, as if the act of survival itself was born from memory of the age before, and then, inexplicably, they buried it. Around 8000 BCE, the people who attended this sanctuary filled it with earth and sand, sealing every pillar, every carving. It was deliberate, meticulous, and reverent. Archaeologist Klaus Schmidt believed they buried it to protect it, not destroy it, like closing a book no longer meant to be read. But from whom were they hiding it? From future generations, from invaders, or from the gods themselves? There are deeper questions here. ones that touch the edge of human consciousness. If Göbekli Tepe was a map of the stars, what message did it preserve? Some researchers believe the patterns encode the positions of constellations as they appeared 12,000 years ago, a celestial snapshot of a moment in prehistory. Others propose it was a cosmic calendar, tracking not just seasons but ages, like the zodiacal epochs of later myth, where the world moves from the age of Leo to Taurus to Aquarius. Could it be that the builders of Göbekli Tepe were marking the beginning, or the end, of such an age? In that era, the world was changing violently. The Ice Age was collapsing, glaciers were melting, sea levels were rising. Perhaps they saw the stars as witnesses to the upheaval, eternal, unchanging markers in a world that no longer made sense. In carving them into stone, they anchored memory itself. The stars became scripture. The temple became a message to the future. We were here. We saw the sky fall. Modern archaeologists try to separate myth from evidence, but Göbekli Tepe refuses such division. It is myth turned to matter. Some call it humanity's first cathedral. Others call it a library of stone. Every surface is an idea, every carving a fragment of a lost cosmology. Its symmetry hints at mathematics, its orientation at knowledge of axial tilt. The builders may have tracked the precession of the equinoxes, a cycle lasting nearly 26,000 years. That would mean they understood the movement of time on a cosmic scale, something our textbooks say was discovered only in Babylon 50 millennia later. The pillars themselves are anthropomorphic. Their T-shape resembles headless human forms, arms carved along their sides, hands clasped at the front. Were these the ancestors, deities, or perhaps a symbolic merging of man and cosmos? Humanity is the pillar holding up the sky. That image echoes across the ancient world. Atlas in Greece, Tar in Egypt, the world tree in Norse myth. Did all these later cultures inherit a faint echo of Göbekli Tepe's theology, a religion of balance between heaven and earth, of remembering the stars so that humanity might not forget itself? When the site was rediscovered in the 1990s, scholars resisted its implications. It was easier to call it an anomaly than to rebuild the timeline of civilization. Yet, anomalies accumulate. In Egypt's desert, Nabta Playa reveals similar star alignments from around 7000 BCE. In the Andes, Tiwanaku and Pumapunku share geometric precision and astronomical placement. Across continents, the oldest monuments seem obsessed with the sky, as if every culture was trying to restore a language they once spoke fluently. Perhaps Göbekli Tepe was not the first but the last, the final echo of a civilization that fell before the ice melted. If so, its builders were not inventing but remembering. Their knowledge, carved into stone, might be the residue of something far older, something that survived not through bloodline but through dream and ritual. Tonight, as stars wheel overhead, their same constellations still trace across the heavens. Cygnus still glides down the Milky Way, Scorpius still crawls beneath it. The sky has not forgotten, only we have. And perhaps that's why Göbekli Tepe was buried, because its builders knew that forgetting is necessary for beginning again. But if we are remembering now, after 12,000 years of silence, what happens when memory wakes? There are maps in this world that should not exist. Maps that depict places no one could have seen, drawn by hands that belonged to centuries long before flight, before satellites, before the idea that the Earth could be measured at all. They are relics of impossible knowledge, fragments of a memory that seems to stretch backward past the edge of recorded time, back into the age before the ice melted. One of them is called the Piri Reis map. A Turkish admiral drew it in 1513 on gazelle skin, with colored inks and delicate calligraphy. It shows the coastlines of Europe, Africa, and South America with surprising precision. But what unsettled historians was not the artistry. It was the southern section. There, beneath the curling waves of the Atlantic, lies a detailed outline of what looks unmistakably like Antarctica. Not covered in ice, but green and mountainous, free of the frozen cloak that buries it today. Mainstream historians argue that it's coincidence, that the unlinked coast is merely an elongated depiction of South America. But early cartographers were not known for creative accidents. They copied what they saw, or what they had been told. When the map was rediscovered in 1929, experts at the U.S. Hydrographic Office examined it carefully. Their verdict was curious. The representation of the Antarctic coastline corresponded not to the icebound continent of the present, but to the land mass beneath the ice, revealed only by modern seismic surveys. How could a 16th-century sailor know what lay under 2 miles of ice? Piri Reis himself claimed his sources were ancient maps, older than Alexander, older than the Greeks, from the time of Iskender. Some believe these could have come from the Library of Alexandria before its fires, or from the lost charts of the Phoenicians. But what if they came from somewhere older still? What if they were the last surviving memory of a seafaring culture that mapped the world before the great meltwater floods erased its ports? Other maps repeat the anomaly. Arance Fine's 1531 world map also portrays Antarctica as a double-lobed continent with rivers, capes, and inland valleys. Philippe Boichet in 1737 went further. He divided Antarctica into 2 islands separated by a waterway, precisely as seismic studies confirmed in the 20th century. Each of these cartographers insisted they were copying older sources. The simplest explanation is often the hardest to accept. It suggests that someone, at some forgotten time, circumnavigated the globe, or at least charted its coasts, long before our recorded history begins. To do that, they would have needed mathematics, astronomy, and navigation techniques equal to or exceeding those of the Renaissance. They would have known latitude and longitude. They would have known the size of the Earth. Perhaps they followed the stars just as the builders of Göbekli Tepe did. Perhaps the heavens themselves were their compass. If a civilization existed before the Ice Age, its survivors might have lived near the coasts, precisely the regions lost when the glaciers melted. When the sea rose, their maps would have been all that remained, carried forward by traders, priests, or wanderers into later ages. There's a strange harmony in the shapes of these early charts. The distances between continents are too accurate to be luck. The curvature of the Earth, the proportions of land to sea, they're drawn with knowledge of global geometry. It feels less like discovery, more like memory resurfacing through repetition. But memory, like a copied manuscript, decays with each retelling. Each generation redrew the lines, losing context, adding myths. By the time Piri Reis copied them, perhaps he no longer understood what he was preserving. He saw outlines, not meaning. Yet something ancient persisted through him, like a voice echoing across time. Historians often frame progress as linear, the slow climb from ignorance to enlightenment. But maps like these whisper another story, that humanity has forgotten as much as it has learned. The knowledge of the globe may not have been discovered once, but rediscovered after long silence. We measure the Earth with satellites now, yet still we argue about what it means to know it. When you look closely at the Piri Reis map, faint inscriptions crowd its margins. Tiny notes describe strange lands, mountains where the giants dwell, birds large as ships, golden islands. They read like the residue of myth layered over observation. Perhaps the original chart was purely scientific, later wrapped in folklore to survive among people who no longer understood its language. Myth as camouflage. Even the name Antarctica carries a ghost of memory. Antarctos, opposite to the bear, opposite to the northern pole. Ancient Greeks believed in symmetry. If land existed in the north, there must be a balance in the south. Yet how could they know its shape so closely unless someone somewhere had once seen it? Modern radar mapping of Antarctica has revealed subglacial mountain ranges, river systems, and possible ancient lake beds that mirror the outlines drawn on those early charts. It is as though the past were faintly visible beneath layers of ice, waiting to thaw not only in geography but in consciousness. Skeptics argue for coincidence. They always will. Coincidence is comfortable. It keeps history tidy. But when coincidences pile into patterns, we begin to sense the faint architecture of something larger. Not certainty, but resonance. The maps resonate. They feel like fingerprint pressed into parchment by hands long vanished. Imagine those map makers, whoever they were, standing on the deck of a vessel carved from wood or stone or something we no longer use, tracing coastlines unknown to the rest of the world. They look up at the stars for orientation, perhaps guided by a mathematics of the heavens we have yet to rediscover. They draw, not for conquest but for remembrance, knowing the sea would one day reclaim their cities. The maps are their message in a bottle, drifting forward through millennia. When Piri Reis inked his map, he could not have known that the world he depicted had once been a single expanse of land. Before meltwater reshaped the continents, he merely copied. But copying is also remembering. Through his hands, the memory of that older world reached us. Perhaps every map is a form of prayer, a way of holding on to the shape of the world when time threatens to dissolve it. And perhaps the reason these ancient maps disturb us is because they remind us of what we once were capable of knowing. Somewhere beneath the ice of Antarctica, the mountains still stand, silent witnesses to both eras, the one that built the first maps and the one that forgot. The snow keeps them secret for now, but the ice melts faster each year. One day, we may see the land the ancients drew so long ago, and in its unveiled coastlines, glimpse the outline of our own lost beginning. There is a scar beneath our feet that runs deeper than any myth, older than any empire, and yet we only began to notice it recently. A geological wound marking the boundary between one world and the next. Around 12,800 years ago, the Earth entered a sudden freeze, a violent interruption known as the Younger Dryas. The Ice Age, which had been fading, returned with fury. Temperatures plummeted, megafauna vanished, forests turned to tundra. And somewhere in that chaos, something extraordinary and terrible may have happened. For decades, the event was explained as random climate fluctuation, a twitch in nature's slow rhythm. But in the 21st century, scientists began to uncover evidence that the change was not gradual at all. It was abrupt, almost instantaneous. Layers of sediment from North America, Greenland, and Syria all bear the same dark signature. A thin line of carbon-rich dust, magnetic spherules, and nanodiamonds, the clues of an impact. The so-called Younger Dryas boundary layer became a point of obsession. At sites like Murray Springs in Arizona and Abu Huraira in Syria, that layer sits like a thin black mirror, separating the old world from the new. Within it are fragments of high-temperature glass, formed by heat exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius, enough to melt rock. Tiny metallic particles suggest something entered the atmosphere and exploded with unimaginable force. But where did it strike? One theory speaks of a fragmented comet, a cosmic visitor that broke apart as it neared Earth, scattering fire across continents. The Clovis people of North America, famous for their fluted spear points, disappeared soon after. So did mammoths, saber-toothed cats, and giant sloths. The air filled with ash, the sky darkened, and the ice returned. It was not extinction by cold, but by memory, the trauma of a sky that turned to flame. Skeptics dismissed the idea for years. There was no crater large enough, they said, no smoking gun. But then came hints. A possible depression under Greenland's Hiawatha Glacier, stretching over 30 kilometers wide. Buried beneath a kilometer of ice, its shape was unmistakable. Some researchers proposed it was impact-related, perhaps the very remnant of that lost comet. Others argued it was older. The debate remains unresolved, caught between geology and something more mythic. The idea that the heavens themselves once erased a chapter of our history. Because if the impact theory is true, then it explains more than climate. It explains forgetting. It explains why so many civilizations begin their myths with fire and flood. The Sumerians wrote of God sending down stones of fire. The Egyptians told of a night when the stars fell. The Hopi, in the American Southwest, speak of the world's previous age ending when the sky god destroyed it with blazing serpents. Could these all be memories of the same event, retold across thousands of generations, reshaped by fear and reverence? When modern humans emerge from the ice, they may have carried these stories as warnings, encoded in religion, in ritual, in architecture. The ziggurats, pyramids, and mounds that follow could have been attempts to reconnect heaven and earth, to make peace with what fell from the sky. Some geologists trace the impact's effects in melted glass found across 4 continents, from the Carolinas to the Syrian desert, from Belgium to Chile. In each place, the glass shows the same isotopic signature, the same brief fury. When seen together, they form a pattern, not of myth, but of memory written in stone. And yet the academic world resists. To accept a cataclysm is to accept interruption. It means acknowledging that civilization's rise was not linear, that something older may have fallen before. Science prefers continuity, a chain of cause and effect, tidy and complete. But nature has never been tidy. It breathes in cycles, creation, destruction, renewal. When a civilization ends suddenly, it leaves no time for decay. It vanishes, leaving only the faintest residue. Carved stone, a buried temple, a story whispered by the survivors. Perhaps that is why Göbekli Tepe was built. Perhaps it was a monument to endurance, a marker erected by those who lived through the long night. In that case, the temple would not have been the dawn of civilization, but the morning of its twilight. The Younger Dryas stands as a line of erasure, not only in climate records but in consciousness. Before it, something thrived. After it, we began again, weaker but remembering. Maybe this is why ancient myths so often begin after a flood, as if aware that something came before that cannot be spoken. Even in the ice cores of Greenland, the story is preserved. The layers show a sudden influx of dust and platinum, both signs of cosmic material. It is the planet's own diary, frozen for 12 millennia. Reading it is like peering into a wound that never fully healed. What if this event didn't just destroy ecosystems, but knowledge? Imagine a civilization dependent on the stars, the sea, and memory. Imagine it shattered overnight, its monuments swallowed by rising tides, its libraries turned to ash. The survivors would scatter, carrying fragments of memory. Their descendants, centuries later, might tell of gods punishing the world, of floods and serpents, of stars that devoured the sky. And so history would begin again, not from ignorance, but from trauma. The cataclysm theory invites discomfort because it strips us of certainty. It tells us we are not the peak of progress, merely the next iteration after fire. It suggests that memory itself is fragile, that knowledge can be burned away like forest under comet fire. When we look at the night sky, we imagine it eternal, unchanging. But space is not silent. It is full of remnants, of paths of destruction looping endlessly through the void. The same cosmos that gave us light has also, again and again, reset the world. Perhaps the first civilization ended not because it failed, but because it was simply in the wrong place, at the wrong moment in cosmic time. And perhaps the scar it left, that black line in the sediment, is not just evidence of extinction, but of memory calling out through the ages, reminding us that the sky has fallen before, and it will fall again. Some nights, when you stare long enough into the dark, the stars don't look peaceful at all. They look like scars, faint reminders of something that once burned the sky. Perhaps that's because once the sky truly did burn. Around the world, across cultures that should never have met, stories speak of a time when the heavens opened and fire rained down. The ancient Egyptians called it the Day of the Destroyer. The Greeks remembered Phaethon, the reckless son of the sun, who lost control of his father's chariot and scorched the earth. The Hopi told of blazing serpents descending from the clouds, and in Hindu texts the god Indra hurled thunderbolts that turned cities to glass. Different tongues, same terror. Perhaps myth has always been our way of remembering what we can't bear to face directly, that one night the stars betrayed us. The Younger Dryas boundary holds the physical echo of those tales. Under a microscope, the black layer is full of what should not be there. Carbonized vegetation, melted quartz, platinum, and spherules that could only have formed at the edge of a cosmic blast. Researchers like Richard Firestone and Alan West argued that these traces were evidence of multiple airbursts, fragments of a disintegrating comet striking the atmosphere like bullets of fire. The Earth would have looked as if it were under siege. In the space of a single generation, much of the northern hemisphere burned. Forests vanished. Megafauna fell. And in the ashes, humanity began again. But if this was merely destruction, why do the oldest surviving stories treat it with reverence? Across continents, the fire from the sky is not only catastrophe, it's revelation. It is the gods cleansing, resetting, purifying. Maybe those who lived through it saw something divine in survival itself. The sky gave them terror, yes, but also memory, the understanding that nothing lasts. In Australia, Aboriginal Dreamtime stories speak of the fire devil, a being that fell from the heavens, lighting the world aflame before disappearing beneath the earth. In the Middle East, the Zoroastrian Avesta describes a celestial stone that struck and birthed molten rivers, the metal that will return at the world's end. The Navajo tell of a sky canoe that shattered, scattering fire across the plains. And in ancient Mesoamerica, the Popol Vuh recounts how the gods destroyed their first creation with a storm of burning resin, turning men into monkeys so they might remember humility. These stories do not come from one place. They are not copies of one another, yet they rhyme, as if born from the same moment, retold through generations until myth became language, and language became forgetting. If the impact theory of the Younger Dryas is true, then the fire was real. A fragmented comet could have exploded over the Laurentide ice sheet, vaporizing millions of tons of water, sending shock waves around the globe. The air itself would have ignited. Winds hotter than furnaces would have swept continents. And when the heat died, the cold returned, a sudden, brutal winter that lasted 1,000 years. But the deeper question is not how it happened, it's what it did to the human mind. Before that night, humanity was a species of wanderers, artists, and hunters. Afterward, something shifted. We began to build, we began to record, we began to fear the sky. Archaeoastronomers have noticed something strange. Some of the world's oldest symbols, spirals, suns, and branching patterns carved into stone, may represent plasma formations visible in the atmosphere after such impacts. When the magnetic field is disturbed, auroras intensify, twisting into forms both beautiful and terrifying. To our ancestors, those shapes would have looked like gods fighting in the sky, serpents of fire, wheels of light. And so they carved them, again and again, into cave walls, rock faces, and temple pillars. In Utah, in Siberia, in South Africa, identical symbols appear, separated by oceans and millennia. If these carvings truly represent celestial events, then our first artists were witnesses of catastrophe. They did not just paint what they saw on Earth, they recorded the heavens collapsing. Their art was survival through remembrance. Perhaps that is why later civilizations built monuments aligned with the heavens. The pyramids, the stone circles, the ziggurats, all are ways of fixing the sky in place, of ensuring it never again turns against us. Each structure becomes a conversation between terror and hope. If you can predict the stars, perhaps you can control them. If you can measure the solstice, perhaps you can prevent the fire's return. But the truth is crueler. The cosmos is indifferent. Comets still wander the void. Their paths cross ours with silent precision. Astronomers today track hundreds of near-Earth objects, knowing that one mistake, one unseen fragment, could erase us as swiftly as it did them. We comfort ourselves with data and probability, yet the same fragile fear persists, the same one that drove our ancestors to build temples from stone and myths from memory. Some believe the impact was more than random, that it was part of a greater cycle, the Earth passing through dense debris fields every few millennia, a cosmic heartbeat that resets life. The ancients might have known this rhythm, encoded it into their calendars, into the precession of constellations. The Mayan long count, for instance, marks 5,126-year intervals, roughly 1/4 of the precessional cycle. Coincidence, or a remnant of an older science, one that treated time not as a line, but as a spiral, where creation and destruction are merely phases of the same breath. If a civilization before the Ice Age knew the stars so well that they could map continents and predict cycles, they might have also foreseen the end. Maybe they didn't just die. Maybe they prepared. They built sanctuaries in the highlands, carved myths to carry forward memory, and buried knowledge where water could not reach. Göbekli Tepe might have been one such archive, sealed in anticipation of the fire to come. It's a haunting thought, that the first civilization ended not in ignorance, but in awareness, that they knew the cycle would return and chose to leave us warnings. We have found fragments, astronomical alignments, sudden gaps in human progress, inexplicable myths of the same cosmic fire. But fragments are not answers, they're whispers. When fire fell from the sky, the earth did not end, it was reborn. Forests returned, animals evolved, and humanity rose again. With dreams of heaven and stories of gods who once burned the world, tonight, as you look up at the stars, remember that they have not always been kind. The same light that guides us also judges us, and maybe somewhere out there a fragment still wanders, waiting for its turn to remind us that even the sky can fall. If fire was the beginning of the end, then water was the silence that followed. Every ancient civilization, from the deserts of Sumer to the mountains of Peru, remembers a great flood. To historians, these tales are metaphor, moral lessons written in mythic prose. But to those who listen between the lines, they sound less like stories and more like confessions. The whispered memory of an event so vast that no culture could forget it, yet none could bear to name it plainly. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of humanity's oldest surviving texts, the immortal Utnapishtim tells of how the gods, angered by humanity's noise, decided to drown the world. Only he, warned by the god Ea, built a massive vessel, filled it with seeds and life, and rode the waves for 6 days and 7 nights until silence fell. The tale predates the book of Genesis by a millennium, yet Noah's Ark mirrors it almost perfectly. A righteous man chosen, a deluge lasting 40 days, a dove searching for land. Even the mountain names sound alike. Nisia in one, Ararat in the other. Coincidence, perhaps, but how do identical memories appear on opposite sides of time? In Hindu scripture, the Matsya Purana tells of Manu, warned by a fish that a great flood would come to cleanse the earth. The fish, an avatar of Vishnu, guided his boat through rising waters until it rested on a northern peak. In Greek myth, Deucalion and Pyrrha survived a similar deluge sent by Zeus. In Aztec lore, only Coxcox and Xochiquetzal lived to tell the story. In China, Emperor Yu tamed floodwaters that had drowned the world. And among the Hopi, it was not a boat that saved them, but the Amped people, beings who led survivors underground until the surface was safe again. Everywhere, the same pattern emerges: warning, water, survival, renewal. The details change, but the fear remains constant. Something ended, and a few began again. The flood is not moral allegory. It is memory. The earth drowned once, and those who lived carried the story in their blood. Modern geology quietly agrees. Around 11,600 years ago, precisely when the Younger Dryas ended, global sea levels rose abruptly, perhaps by more than 60 meters. Meltwater from collapsing ice sheets surged into the oceans, reshaping coastlines, submerging entire regions like Doggerland and the Sunda Shelf. To our ancestors, it must have felt like the world was dissolving. Rivers turned to seas, mountains became islands, and the sky reigned for generations. If there had been any coastal civilization before that moment, any network of harbors, temples, or settlements built near the sea, they would have vanished beneath the waves. Only refugees fleeing inland would remain, carrying shards of language, fragments of maps, half-remembered rituals. Perhaps that is why myths of sky gods and star teachers appear suddenly among early Neolithic tribes. They were not gods at all, but survivors from a drowned world, parsing down what little they remembered before even that memory turned sacred. Archaeologists call these transitions cultural horizons, and new people appear out of nowhere, advanced, organized, bringing agriculture, architecture, and myths about floods. The Sumerians spoke of Eridu, the first city, built by gods who descended after the deluge. In Egypt, the god Thoth was said to have restored writing after the flood erased all knowledge. In Mesoamerica, the serpent god Quetzalcoatl retaught humanity the arts of civilization. Different names, same function, the bringer of memory. It is tempting to see these stories as coincidence, but when every culture insists that their beginnings came after a global drowning, coincidence begins to sound like denial. The waters came, something perished, and something, or someone, remembered enough to start again. Even the timeline fits with haunting precision. Plato's dialogues tell of Atlantis, the island of kings, swallowed by the sea around 9,000 years before Solon, roughly 11,600 years before our time. Mainstream scholars call it allegory, a moral tale about pride. Yet Plato claimed his source was Solon himself, who heard it from Egyptian priests and say, men who said the story was history, not metaphor. They described an advanced people destroyed in a single day and night of earthquakes and floods, when the seas swallowed their land. The date matches the abrupt meltwater pulse that ended the Younger Dryas. How many coincidences does it take to make a pattern? If such a civilization existed, one that mastered navigation, astronomy, and perhaps even engineering, its survivors would have scattered. The highest places would become their refuges, mountain plateaus, inland valleys, sheltered lakes. It's no accident that the world's earliest temples and sacred sites appear on elevated ground. Göbekli Tepe rises from hills far from the sea. The Andean ruins of Tiahuanaco and Pumapunku rest high above floodlines. Even the legends of Shambhala, the hidden kingdom of wisdom, place it beyond reach of the ocean's rage. Perhaps these sanctuaries were built not to worship gods, but to preserve what remained of knowledge, astronomy, geometry, the sacred patterns of time. The survivors, traumatized by catastrophe, might have sworn to encode their memory in stone, where water could not erase it. They became the seed of future civilizations, their myths the curriculum of recovery. And then, as centuries passed, memory blurred. The flood became punishment. The survivors became gods. Their knowledge became divine mystery. The truth sank beneath reverence. We forgot that the gods once bled, once fled, once watched the ocean rise as everything they loved disappeared beneath it. If you close your eyes and listen, you can still hear that sound, not of waves on sand, but of memory breaking. It's the murmur of an ocean remembering what it swallowed. Each tide that comes ashore carries a whisper from that age, an unending pulse of loss and return. Perhaps we tell flood myths not to explain the past, but to prepare for the future. Water always returns, ice always melts, and memory, no matter how long it sleeps, always rises again. One day, the sea will come for us too. Cities will drown where deserts once stood, and the survivors will look to the mountains, clutching fragments of the past, inventing stories to soothe their grief, and they will call them myths. But maybe that's what myth has always been, not fiction, but the soul's way of surviving truth. Long after the fires dimmed and the waters receded, humanity began to build again. But this time, the stones were different. They were larger, heavier, almost defiant, as if those who raised them wanted to remind the earth itself that they would not be erased again. You can see it everywhere, from the high plateaus of Peru to the deserts of Egypt and the green valleys of Lebanon. Colossal walls, blocks the size of buses, fitted so precisely that even the whisper of a knife blade cannot pass between them. It is as though the survivors of the cataclysm had decided to leave messages in the one language the earth could never forget: stone. At Baalbek, in the Bekaa Valley of Lebanon, the foundation stones of the ancient temple complex weigh over 800 tons each. The stone of the pregnant woman, still half buried in the quarry, is larger still: 1,000 tons of solid limestone cut with perfect angles. Archaeologists say the Romans built the visible temple, but the deeper foundations tell another story. One far older, far more precise. Even with modern cranes, moving such stones today would be almost impossible. Why then did ancient builders carve them at such a scale? And how did they lift them, set them, and align them with mathematical perfection? In Peru, high in the Andes, the fortress of Sacsayhuaman mirrors the same enigma. Massive blocks, some weighing over 300 tons, interlock like pieces of a puzzle, not with mortar, but with curves and joints that match to the millimeter. Their surfaces are smooth as glass, the edges melted, fused, as if the stone itself had been softened. When sunlight strikes these walls, they shimmer faintly, as if holding a memory of the heat that once shaped them. Some researchers, like engineer Christopher Dunn, have suggested that ancient builders used unknown techniques, perhaps sound or vibration, to move and shape stone, methods that could leave no trace in the archaeological record. The same signature appears thousands of miles away, in Egypt's oldest structures, not the later pyramids but the temples beneath them. Granite blocks are cut with the same impossible precision. The Osirian at Abydos, the Valley Temple near Giza, the unfinished obelisk at Aswan, all display machining marks that modern engineers struggle to replicate. The stone seems to carry memory, as though it were molded by hands that no longer exist. What unites these sites is not culture, but silence. The builders left no writing, no records, no explanations. Only the stones remain, staring across time. It's as if they knew that whatever language they spoke would die, but geometry would endure. Angles and alignments would whisper what words could not. We were here, we remembered. Archaeologists, cautious as always, try to fit these anomalies into accepted timelines. They call them megalithic precursors, local traditions of monumental architecture that eventually gave rise to civilization. But what if it's the other way around? What if the civilizations we know, Sumer, Egypt, the Indus, the Maya, were the inheritors of something older, something that left these markers like signposts for a future that would one day rediscover them? Consider the global pattern. At the same time that Göbekli Tepe was being built in Anatolia, similar alignments appear elsewhere. Nabta Playa in Egypt's desert, an astronomical circle marking the summer solstice. The great megaliths of Karnak in France, stretching for miles in mathematical order, and the mysterious dolmens of Korea and Japan, whose construction dates defy simple chronology. None of these sites are connected by geography or language, yet they share an obsession with orientation, proportion, and permanence. It is as though humanity, newly reborn from catastrophe, was rebuilding not only its world but its relationship with the cosmos. Every pillar, every monolith, every temple pointed upward, as if asking the same question: Will the sky fall again? Perhaps they built not just to worship, but to stabilize, to anchor the heavens to the earth. If they remembered that the stars had once burned and the oceans had risen, they might have sought to fix both in place through architecture, to turn fear into harmony. The result was a geometry of resilience, triangles, circles, and cardinal alignments, the language of the universe carved into stone. In the Andes, at Ollantaytambo and Pumapunku, the stonework seems to echo techniques that defy linear history. Perfect drill holes, 90-degree interior corners cut into granite, polished planes as though shaped by laser. The Inca themselves claimed they had not built these structures and they inherited them. Local legend spoke of a race of Viracocha, pale-skinned teachers who appeared after a flood, bearing knowledge of architecture and the stars. Myths, perhaps, or the fading memory of an older people whose name we have lost. Even the Great Pyramid of Giza fits this pattern. The precision of its alignment, within a fraction of a degree of true north, has never been surpassed. Its base forms a near-perfect square, its proportions encoding pi and the golden ratio. To the ancients, it was not just a tomb, but a harmonic instrument, tuned to the earth itself. It vibrates with a subtle resonance, a whisper in stone. Could it be that these architects of stone understood vibration, not as sound, but as structure? That they saw matter as a form of frozen frequency, something to be shaped through harmony rather than force? We call them builders, but perhaps they were something else, translators between heaven and earth. Their work seems less about shelter, more about remembrance. When the earth resets, language dies, but stone remains. And so they spoke to us through the only medium the flood could not erase. Maybe that's why so many of these structures are unfinished. The Aswan obelisk, the half-carved blocks of Pumapunku, the buried rings of Göbekli Tepe. Their builders may have known the end was near again, leaving their work as a message, a monument not to what was completed, but to what was lost. We walk among their ruins and call them mysteries, yet to them we are the mystery, a species that forgot how to listen to stone. When night falls on Baalbek or Sacsayhuaman, and moonlight slides along the old walls, you can almost feel the hum beneath the silence, as though the earth still remembers the hands that shaped it, and waits for us to remember too. In every forgotten temple, on every worn tablet, and in every myth that survives from the world's first civilizations, there is a pattern that repeats, a language without words. Spirals, serpents, suns, and circles. They appear across continents, across oceans, across millennia. It is as though humanity once spoke in geometry, long before alphabets existed, and fragments of that ancient code still echo through art and religion, carrying messages that no one remembers how to read. The same serpent curls through Egypt's hieroglyphs, through the stones of Angkor Wat, and across the carvings of the Olmec and the Maya. It winds around Greek columns, slithers along the walls of India's temples, and glows in the stories of the Hopi, the Norse, and the Dogon. The symbol means many things: wisdom, chaos, rebirth, infinity. Yet its essence never changes. In the oldest myths, the serpent is not evil. It is knowledge itself. It sheds its skin. It renews. It remembers. Perhaps that is what civilization once tried to do after the flood, to shed the memory of ruin and begin again. Spirals are older still. They are carved into megaliths at Newgrange in Ireland, painted in red ochre on the walls of Paleolithic caves in Spain, and cut into basalt at New Mexico's Chaco Canyon. To archaeologists, they may represent the sunal cycles of time, but if you look closely, they also mimic something universal: the swirl of galaxies, the curl of shells, the motion of water when it drains, the dance of hurricanes. The same shape repeats from the cosmic to the microscopic. It is the fingerprint of motion itself, of life unfolding through pattern. Could it be that the spiral, the most ancient of symbols, was the first human attempt to describe the structure of time. And then there are the suns, radiant disks with rays or wings, found on temple walls, cylinder seals, and pottery fragments from Sumer to Mesoamerica. The winged sun of Egypt mirrors the Aten, symbol of divine light and cosmic order. In Mesopotamia, Shamash rises with identical rays bringing truth and justice, and across the ocean, the Inca Inti, the Aztec Tonatiuh, and the Hopi Tawa all hold the same face of light. These are not mere coincidences of imagination. They are a shared inheritance, a memory of reverence toward the one force all survivors could depend on after the ice, the returning sun. If fire once fell from the sky and water swallowed the world, the sun would have been the first sign that life could begin again. No wonder it became divine. Yet its worship seems too consistent, too systematic to be spontaneous. The alignments of temples, pyramids, and stone circles all trace the same solar events. The solstices, the equinoxes, the zeniths. Who taught so many distant peoples to measure the heavens in identical ways? Symbols speak when language fails, and across cultures the same geometry appears in sacred design. A triangle for divinity, a square for earth, a circle for eternity. These shapes structure temples from Luxor to Angkor, from Teotihuacan to Stonehenge. They are not decorative. They're instructional, carrying an understanding of proportion and harmony that connects architecture with astronomy, music, and mathematics. The flower of life, a pattern of intersecting circles, appears etched on the granite walls of the Osirian in Egypt and painted in medieval manuscripts thousands of years later. It encodes ratios that form the basis of geometry, sound, and even DNA. Could this pattern be more than aesthetic? A remnant of ancient science disguised as sacred art? The same code seems to reappear in mythic form. The Ouroboros, a serpent eating its tail, represents eternal return. The tree of life connects heaven, earth, and the underworld, appearing in Sumerian, Norse, and Mesoamerican cosmologies. The all-seeing eye, the Trinity, the number 12, the sacred mountain. These motifs span the planet, as if they were not inventions but memories, reshaped through time's erosion. Comparative mythologists like Mircea Eliade and Joseph Campbell sensed this continuity and called it the primordial tradition, an echo of a shared origin before dispersion. In the 20th century, Carl Jung spoke of archetypes, images born from the collective unconscious. But what if these archetypes were not internal at all? What if they were remnants of an older, global language, a symbolic code that once unified humanity before it fragmented into tribes, nations, and religions? Even in the oldest music and architecture, the same ratios reappear. The harmonic intervals of sound, octave, fifth, fourth, mirror the geometry of ancient temples. The Great Pyramid's dimensions encode the same proportions as the harmonic scale. The Sumerians used base 60 mathematics, which divides the circle and measures time to this day. None of these systems appear gradually. They emerge complete, as if inherited. If the flood wiped the slate clean, these patterns were the seeds that survived. Every culture also kept a symbol for memory itself: the book, the scroll, the shell, the labyrinth. In Minoan Crete, the labyrinth represented both prison and passage, a journey inward to find what was lost. Its spiraling corridors mirror the same cosmic geometry found at Newgrange and Chaco Canyon. Maybe this was the real purpose of the labyrinth, not to trap, but to teach. To remind the wanderer that knowledge moves in circles and that every return is also a rebirth. When you stand inside one of these ancient sites, the geometry feels alive. You sense rhythm, a silent pulse running through the stone, like the echo of a forgotten song. These are not ruins of superstition. They are frozen frequencies. They carry memory in proportion and resonance. They remind us that understanding once meant harmony, not domination. Listening to the universe rather than measuring it. The modern world has reduced these symbols to decoration. We hang them as ornaments, tattoo them as art, wear them as jewelry, but they were never meant to be owned. They were meant to be read. And so the question lingers, who wrote this code? Were the spirals, the serpents, the suns, and the geometric temples the spontaneous invention of scattered survivors, or the deliberate reconstruction of something older, something they once knew in its entirety? Maybe that code was not just a language of shapes, but a technology, a way to align consciousness with the cosmos, to rebuild not only cities but equilibrium. If that's true, then the symbols were never meant to mystify us. They were meant to guide us home. Somewhere beneath the noise of the modern world, that ancient language still hums, in the orbit of the planets, in the structure of the atom, in the rhythm of the heart. It never vanished. We did, long before written memory, before the stones and the myths. Something else preserved our story, not in temples or scrolls, but within the body itself. Every cell in us carries a record, an unbroken thread that stretches back through thousands of generations. It remembers migrations, extinctions, encounters, and strange unions that shaped who we are. It is a library written in molecules, the genome, our living fossil, and lately it has begun to speak. When scientists first mapped the human genome, they believed it would tell a simple tale, a slow, steady rise from primitive origins, each mutation a step on the ladder of progress. But as the decoding deepened, the story grew stranger. Instead of a smooth lineage, they found fractures, insertions, absences, echoes of people who no longer exist, entire populations that left their mark in us and then vanished from the earth. Among them were the Neanderthals, long-thought extinct cousins who left traces of their DNA scattered through Eurasia. Then came the Denisovans, discovered not through bones, but through a single finger fragment in a Siberian cave. Their genetic signature appears in modern humans from Melanesia to East Asia. These ghosts of deep time tell us that humanity was never a single species, but a web, a network of hybrid beings sharing knowledge and survival strategies across the Ice Age world. We were never alone, yet even that revelation feels incomplete. Because in our genes lie older patterns still, anomalies that don't match known human or hominin sequences, fragments that seem to have come from an unidentified lineage. Geneticists call them ghost populations. No bones, no faces, no names, just whispers in the code. Where did they come from? What world did they belong to? Some researchers, cautiously, have begun to wonder whether these traces could belong to populations that thrived before the Ice Age collapse. Cultures advanced enough to migrate, interbreed, and vanish, leaving only molecular shadows behind. If a civilization did exist before the flood, perhaps its people did not disappear entirely. Perhaps they walk among us, diffused into every living lineage, invisible yet indelible. This possibility is not fantasy. Recent ancient DNA studies reveal startling complexity in prehistory. A child's bones found in Siberia's Malta site, dated to 24,000 years ago, carry genetic links to both modern Europeans and Native Americans. This single discovery shattered old migration models, proving that Ice Age humans crossed continents long before we imagined. Another study traced an ancient lineage in the Amazon to peoples from Southeast Asia, suggesting a forgotten wave of contact across the Pacific. Each new dataset pushes the beginning of connection farther back, until the line between prehistoric and civilized blurs. We have always been told that civilization began only when we settled, when we farmed. But DNA tells another story, of nomads who mapped continents by instinct, who shared genes, art, and myths across impossible distances. In a sense, our genome is an archaeological record older than any ruin. It keeps the signatures of migrations that no map remembers. The Dogon of Marley, the Polynesians, the Aboriginal Australians. Their oral histories describe ancestral visitors arriving by sea or star. For centuries, such tales were dismissed as metaphor. Yet the migrations encoded in DNA hint that human contact truly spanned oceans earlier than anyone believed possible. How much of myth, then, is merely the body remembering what the mind forgot? Genetic data also reveals an extraordinary event. Around 70,000 years ago, humanity passed through a bottleneck, a near extinction. Only a few thousand individuals may have survived a catastrophe, perhaps a volcanic winter or cosmic impact. The world shrank, but memory endured, and as the survivors rebuilt, they carried with them mutations, adaptations, and perhaps a subconscious recollection of collapse. Is it any wonder that almost every culture's mythology centers on destruction and rebirth? Even the concept of divine ancestry may have roots in genetic memory. Ancient rulers claimed descent from the gods not as arrogance, but as remembrance, the echo of real hybridizations between distinct human groups, encounters that felt divine to later generations. The Sumerian king list, for instance, speaks of kings before the flood, who ruled for tens of thousands of years. Modern scholars interpret it as symbolic exaggeration. But what if those long reigns represent the memory of a different kind of humanity, one older, slower, adapted to another world? Modern humans still carry remnants of Neanderthal immune genes that protect against diseases, and Denisovan genes that help Tibetans breathe at high altitude. These are more than biological advantages. They are the living traces of collaboration, the evidence that survival has always depended on blending, not purity. Civilization itself may be the product of such blending, not the triumph of one lineage, but the synthesis of many. Yet, within this merging, something curious remains. A small fraction of our DNA seems foreign even to our species. It behaves oddly, as though inserted from outside known evolutionary pathways. Some attribute it to viral integration, others to natural horizontal gene transfer. But the pattern is enigmatic. It suggests that life, even human life, is not closed, but porous, capable of absorbing information from beyond itself. If knowledge can cross the boundaries of species, could it not also cross the boundaries of epochs? Could the genetic code be the ultimate archive, storing not only the story of life, but of memory itself? When ancient texts speak of bloodlines of the gods, perhaps they hint at this, not literal divinity, but the inheritance of forgotten knowledge through the body. If the first civilization truly existed before the Ice Age, its people may have passed on fragments of their understanding, not through writing or monuments, but through blood. We are their descendants, not culturally, but molecularly. Their songs are buried in our cells. The genome is patient. It carries every migration, every trauma, every dawn. When we dream of places we've never seen, deserts, stars, floods, maybe it's not imagination, but inheritance. The body remembers the world it once knew. If we learn to read that in a code, perhaps we will discover that the first civilization never vanished at all. It simply became us. And somewhere in our shared DNA, waiting like a dormant chord, their story hums still, soft, persistent, a pulse beneath thought, reminding us that remembering is not a matter of history but of biology. Knowledge does not vanish easily. It must be erased, deliberately, methodically, and with authority. Every time humanity rediscovers a fragment of its forgotten past, it seems to meet the same fate: disbelief, ridicule, suppression. Perhaps this is not coincidence, but design. If the world once fell to chaos, maybe we learned that memory itself is dangerous, that knowing too much about what came before can unmake the order we've built since. Or maybe the silence that follows discovery has less to do with fear and more to do with control. History is written by those who survive, but it is edited by those who rule. Every empire, every church, every institution that rose after the flood built its power not just on what it taught, but on what it forbade. From Alexandria to the Vatican, from Baghdad to Beijing, Libraries burned not always by accident but by instruction. Knowledge that contradicted orthodoxy was removed quietly, sometimes by fire, sometimes by translation, sometimes simply by neglect. The Great Library of Alexandria, once the heart of the ancient world's wisdom, held scrolls from Egypt, Greece, Babylon, and perhaps older still. It is said that maps of lands beyond the Western Sea were stored there, along with records of the lands before the flood. When it burned, the smoke carried not just the words of scholars, but the lost physical memory of a world we no longer believe existed. Yet no one truly knows who ordered the destruction. Was it the Roman conquest, the early Christians, later invaders? Or did it die slowly, starved by indifference, its knowledge scattered to safer secret places? The pattern continues through time. The Spanish conquistadors burned the Maya codices because they spoke of older cycles of creation and destruction, stories that didn't fit the European timeline. The Emperor Qin Shi Huang buried scholars alive for preserving forbidden texts. The Vatican archives, still sealed in part today, hold thousands of documents that remain unseen. Relics of heresies, reports of strange discoveries, perhaps even accounts of artifacts found beneath desert or ice that do not fit our chronology. And in the modern world, the silencing continues through funding, through reputation, through the quiet exile of those who question too deeply. Scientists who propose that civilization might be older than we think often find themselves at the edge of academia, their work dismissed as pseudoscience before it's even read. The word itself, forbidden archaeology, is a warning label. But what if the boundary between accepted and forbidden knowledge is not defined by truth, but by convenience? What if the story we're told is not wrong, only incomplete, pruned, simplified, curated so that the present appears inevitable? Archaeology is built on evidence, yes, but also on narrative. For every artifact displayed in museums, countless others lie in storage, unclassified, unpublished, or quietly forgotten because they don't fit the model. A stone tool in a layer too deep, a skeleton too old, a pyramid aligned to stars that shouldn't have mattered yet. Even now, discoveries emerge that challenge the timeline. Ancient footprints in Mexico dated to 23,000 years ago, ruins beneath Lake Titicaca, tool marks under glacial deposits in North America. Each anomaly flickers briefly through headlines before vanishing into silence. Perhaps this silence is not conspiracy, but habit, the inertia of a world that fears chaos more than ignorance. If we accepted that civilization might be far older, our understanding of progress, religion, and even identity would collapse. The illusion of beginning would crumble. The line dividing prehistory and history would dissolve, leaving only the truth that humanity's story is not a straight ascent, but a cycle of remembering and forgetting. Still, there are those who listen in the margins, independent researchers, archaeologists, linguists, engineers, who suspect that something vital has been edited out. They trace the same patterns through myth, astronomy, geology, and genetics, piecing together a mosaic of lost continuity. Some call them dreamers, but perhaps they are archivists of memory, doing the work institutions have forgotten how to do. In the 20th century, scholars like Charles Hapgood dared to propose that the Earth's crust shifts periodically, moving entire continents, that Antarctica might once have been temperate, supporting life and perhaps civilization. His theories were dismissed, yet decades later, satellite imaging revealed ancient riverbeds beneath the ice. Graham Hancock, ridiculed for suggesting a pre-Ice Age culture, watched as discoveries like Göbekli Tepe forced mainstream science to move its timelines backward. Step by step, what was once heresy becomes hypothesis, and what was once impossible becomes quietly absorbed into the textbooks, without acknowledgement of those who first whispered it. Why does truth need permission to exist? Why must it be dressed in credentials before we can hear it? Perhaps because the structure of knowledge itself mirrors empire, hierarchical, self-protecting, slow to admit defeat. Institutions that claim to guard truth often guard stability instead. They call it skepticism. But skepticism without curiosity is just fear wearing logic's mask. Imagine, for a moment, that somewhere in those locked archives, in Vatican basements, in military vaults, in university storerooms, there are documents describing artifacts found deep beneath Antarctic ice, or inscriptions discovered in deserts older than agriculture. Not hoaxes, not fantasies, but real anomalies filed away under inconclusive. Imagine how quietly such things could be forgotten, not through malice, but through the bureaucracy of disbelief. The silence of the scholars is not empty. It hums with suppressed resonance, like a bell struck long ago that still vibrates beneath the noise of progress. Sometimes, that hum surfaces, a paper overlooked, a fossil redated, a discovery misfiled for half a century that suddenly changes everything. History moves not in revelation but in rediscovery. Perhaps it has always been this way. The knowledge of the first civilization, whatever form it took, was never truly lost. It was buried beneath institutions, myths, and fear. Every time we begin to unearth it, the same reflex emerges: cover it, dismiss it, label it. But the truth does not care for labels. It waits, patient and incorruptible, beneath layers of dust, politics, and pride. Someday, when the silence breaks, it will not come as a shout, but as a whisper. The same whisper that echoes through the ruins, the same one that speaks from the stones and the stars, reminding us that what we call discovery is only the act of remembering what was never truly forgotten. Beneath the white silence of Antarctica lies a secret that has outlasted empires. Beneath the layers of snow and compressed time, 2 miles deep in some places, there are shapes that should not be there. The ice hides mountain ranges as tall as the Alps, riverbeds carved long before the first human hand drew on cave walls, and vast voids that seem too symmetrical, too deliberate to be only nature's work. The continent at the bottom of the world is more than frozen wasteland. It is the tomb of memory sealed beneath 15 million years of amnesia. For centuries, no one knew what slept there. The Greeks called it Terra Australis Incognita, the unknown southern land, imagined as balance to the north. The earliest explorers who reached its shores found only endless white, and an ocean that bit through hull and bone alike. Yet the maps that preceded their arrival, drawn hundreds of years before Antarctica's official discovery in 1820, depicted something uncanny. Arance Finet's 1531 world map shows a landmass in the south shaped precisely like the Antarctic continent, but without its ice. A Peary race map drawn earlier still outlines the same coast, detailed and accurate to a degree impossible for the instruments of that age. If these were copies of elder maps, who drew the originals, and when could they have seen a continent now buried beneath ice? Modern technology has begun to reveal what lies beneath. Radar scans from Operation Icebridge, a NASA mission mapping the continent's subglacial landscape, uncovered networks of lakes and canyons stretching for thousands of kilometers. Some of these waterways active, flowing silently under the ice. Others appear as fossil rivers, frozen since the last interglacial period. But deeper still, researchers found anomalies, perfect circular depressions, magnetic disturbances, geometric patterns echoing through the radar data. Official reports call them unusual geological formations. The imagination whispers something older. In 2018, scientists announced the discovery of a massive crater beneath the Hiawatha Glacier in Greenland, 30 kilometers wide, formed by an impact perhaps 12,800 years ago, coinciding exactly with the Younger Dryas cataclysm. If that much destruction lay hidden beneath Greenland's ice, what might rest under Antarctica's? The Wilkes Land anomaly, detected decades earlier, shows a similar circular gravitational signature more than 480 kilometers across. Far larger than Chicxulub, the crater that ended the age of the dinosaurs. Geologists debate its meaning. Some see ancient volcanic activity, others suspect an impact so deep in time that it predates human memory. Yet one can't help but wonder if these scars of stone and ice are connected, if the pattern of destruction that reshaped the planet's climate might have also erased a civilization. The ice cores of Antarctica tell a story in layers. Each stratum preserves the breath of an age: dust, pollen, volcanic ash, the faint trace of cosmic radiation. Around 12 millennia ago, the chemical signatures shift abruptly. Levels of platinum spike, soot increases, temperatures swing wildly. It is the geological echo of the same catastrophe carved into myths: the fire, the flood, the long winter. And above it all, the ice kept growing, sealing the evidence under its glossy skin. Some researchers have speculated that Antarctica was not always a polar desert. Fossilized plants discovered beneath the ice, ferns, conifers, even pollen from flowering species, suggest it was once temperate, possibly even lush. Satellite imaging shows what appear to be ancient shorelines, frozen rivers, and circular basins that might once have held lakes or cities. When the continent shifted to its current position, or when the planet tilted and the poles realigned, it froze not just landscape, but history. If a civilization existed there before the last glacial maximum, it would now rest beneath kilometers of ice, perfectly preserved, perfectly unreachable. Whispers of such a world appear in ancient law. The Greeks spoke of Hyperborea, a radiant land beyond the north wind, where the sun shone half the year and vanished the other half. The Egyptians told Herodotus that their gods came from a southern land untouched by time. Even Plato's Atlantis, when measured by the philosopher's vague coordinates, aligns not westward into the Atlantic but southward, toward a vast, now buried world. Could these myths have been distorted memories of a civilization erased by polar shift? There are also stranger stories, rumors of post-war expeditions that mapped regions of Antarctica kept secret from the public, of photographs showing geometric formations beneath the ice, of tunnels large enough to fit aircraft. Operation High Jump, a U.S. naval mission in 1946, officially aimed to test equipment in extreme conditions, yet its scale, 1,400 men, 13 ships, and 33 aircraft, was extraordinary for a simple training exercise. Some say it was reconnaissance, others that it sought something lost, something that could not be allowed to remain found. The reports from that mission remain oddly fragmented. In the silence that follows, speculation grows. But even without legend, the truth is compelling enough. Antarctica is a mirror of our ignorance. Beneath it, entire ecosystems have slept undisturbed for millions of years. Its oldest ice holds microscopic air bubbles, tiny relics of ancient atmospheres. It records not just climate, but catastrophe. Every discovery there extends the timeline of what the Earth remembers. To study the ice is to eavesdrop on the planet's memory. And what it tells us faintly is that the world has turned over many times before. Warmth, bloom, extinction, renewal. The same cycle repeating like breath. If there was a civilization before the Ice Age, the evidence may rest down there, crystallized in layers that can be melted but not denied. What makes the thought so haunting is not that the ice hides ruins, but that it may hide ourselves, the same humanity that learned to chart the stars, to move mountains, to build with intention. Perhaps they reached too far. Perhaps their end came not from ignorance, but from mastery. Now, as our own world warms, the ice begins to speak again. Glaciers retreat, revealing forests, bones, and relics of forgotten epochs. The meltwater runs red with iron and memory. In some places, radar picks up echoes of metallic density deep below, as though something sleeps within. The earth is thawing its archives, but truth emerges slowly from the cold. Each revelation threatens to rewrite the order of history, and so each is received with caution, disbelief, and silence. Maybe the real mystery of Antarctica is not what it hides, but what we fear it might reveal. That civilization is not a straight path of progress, but a circle of rise and ruin, and that beneath the ice of the lost world lies the mirror of our own. Somewhere under those frozen mountains, beneath the crushing silence, something ancient listens. A city of memory, or perhaps only the echo of one, waiting for the moment when the ice finally breathes and the world remembers what it tried so hard to forget. Long before alphabets were carved into clay or pressed into papyrus, humanity spoke in resonance. Words were still forming then, still crawling out of breath and rhythm. But sound was already sacred. The first civilizations that rose after the flood seemed to remember this instinctively. They built with frequencies as much as with stone. They spoke to the world not only with language, but with vibration, a dialogue with the earth itself now mostly forgotten. In every ancient culture, sound was not simply communication but creation. The Egyptians believed the god Tara spoke the world into existence. The Hindu Rig Veda declares that the universe began with a sound, Om. The Gospel of John echoes the same thought thousands of years later. In the beginning was the Word. Beneath that poetry, perhaps there was memory, an understanding that sound is not metaphor but mechanism. The universe, after all, is vibration. Matter itself hums. Every atom sings in frequencies too small for our ears. Maybe the ancients remembered that truth and learned to shape it. When archaeologists first entered the Great Pyramid's inner chambers, they noticed something peculiar. The spaces were tuned. Certain frequencies amplified naturally within the granite walls, producing standing waves that resonated in the bones. The sarcophagus in the king's chamber is cut to the exact dimensions required to generate a pure tone when struck. 432 Hz, the same frequency later revered in musical theory for its harmonic balance with planetary cycles. Was that coincidence? Or could those chambers have been instruments, tools of sound meant to awaken something within the human mind or body? Across the world, other sacred structures share the same sonic intelligence. The Hypogeum of Halsaflieni in Malta, carved over 5,000 years ago, contains a small room known as the oracle chamber. When a deep male voice speaks inside it, the sound vibrates through the stone at precisely 110 Hz, a frequency shown to alter brain activity, producing trance and stillness. At Chavinda Huantar in Peru, ancient stone ducts beneath the temple carried water and air to mimic the roar of a jaguar, transforming the site into a living instrument. And at New Grange in Ireland, the passageway aligns with the rising sun of the winter solstice, so that light floods the inner chamber, just as the air hums with resonance, as if stone and sound together summoned dawn. It is as though these early builders were composing with the planet. They understood that architecture could sing, that stone, when shaped correctly, becomes a vessel for vibration. What they built were not merely temples, but resonant bodies, harmonizing human emotion with the frequency of Earth itself. Some researchers, like Paul Devereaux and Robert John, have studied this phenomenon under the name archaeoacoustics, the archaeology of sound. Their findings suggest that prehistoric sites often share acoustic signatures tuned to human voice ranges. The implication is astonishing, that these structures may have been used to induce altered states of consciousness, to heal, to communicate beyond speech, to remember, even older than the temples of the caves. Inside Paleolithic sanctuaries like Lascaux and Altamira, the most vivid paintings cluster where echoes are strongest. Tap on the wall beneath the painted bison, and it answers like a drum. Blow through a hollow bone flute, and the chamber sings back. The cave itself becomes an instrument, as though the first artist understood that sound could open the invisible, a bridge between matter and spirit. Language in this light may have evolved not from thought, but from tone. The earliest words could have been songs, patterns of vibration that mirrored the world they described. To name something was to match its frequency. When we later reduced language to meaning alone, we forgot that its first power was resonance. The language before language was not spoken, it was felt. Even myths remember this. The Tower of Babel is usually read as punishment for human pride, but perhaps it encodes a deeper memory of fragmentation. Once, humanity shared a single language, and after catastrophe, that harmony was broken. The confusion of tongues may describe not only the loss of words, but the loss of resonance, a fall from vibrational unity into the noise of misunderstanding. Some remnants of that original speech might linger still. In Sanskrit, Hebrew, and other sacred tongues, certain syllables are said to carry intrinsic power. Mantras, names of God, tones of invocation. In Sufi chanting, Tibetan throat singing, Gregorian hymns, and even the polyphonic songs of the Aka people in Central Africa, the same principle persists. The body as an instrument, sound as bridge between worlds. These traditions may not be religion alone, they may be survival, memory of how to speak to creation itself. Modern science is beginning to catch up. Experiments in sematics, a study of how vibration shapes matter, show that sound frequencies create precise geometric patterns in sand, water, even flame. Increase the frequency, and the pattern becomes more complex, more ordered. Perhaps this is how the ancients once built, not by brute force, but by understanding the resonance of matter. To move a stone, find its tone. To lift a mountain, sing to it in harmony. Legends of singing stones and trumpets of the gods appear in nearly every tradition. The Hebrew Bible's walls of Jericho felt a sound. Tibetan stories speak of monks raising stones through chant. In Egyptian myth, Thoth shaped reality through utterance, words that moved the world. These are not random coincidences. They are echoes of a science turned sacred, forgotten, because it could not be understood without humility. If we could recover that language, not the words but the vibration beneath them, what might it tell us? That consciousness is not separate from matter, that every sound we make, every word we speak, changes the structure of the world around us. The ancients may have known this. We are only beginning to remember. Perhaps the reason silence feels sacred is because it contains all frequencies unresolved. The potential for every word ever spoken and every world ever built. The ice of history has frozen that sound, but it still hums beneath our collective memory, waiting to thaw. Somewhere, under glaciers and temples alike, the earth still vibrates with the voice of the first civilization, a low, endless note resonating through time. If you listen closely enough, you can almost hear it. The murmur of the language before language, calling us back into tune. There are moments in history when it feels as though the world simply begins again, when civilizations vanish without explanation, and new ones rise as if from nowhere, carrying knowledge too advanced for their supposed age. Archaeologists call these periods cultural discontinuities. Myths call them the ages of man. But perhaps they are something else entirely, with some resets, subtle and cyclical, erasing and rewriting the story of humanity. The ancient Greeks divided time into 5 ages: the golden, silver, bronze, heroic, and iron. Each ended in calamity, fire, flood, war. And each new age began with innocence. In Hindu cosmology, the yugas follow the same rhythm: Satya, Treta, Dvapara, Kali. 4 cycles descending from harmony into darkness before the pattern renews. The Maya calculated vast epochs called Baktuns, each closing with upheaval. Even modern geology, in its own way, echoes this mythology. Earth's record is a ledger of extinctions, intervals of sudden resets punctuating eons of calm. It is as though the planet itself breathes civilizations into being, then exhales them into dust. When we look closely at the archaeological record, We see these resets everywhere. Around 10,800 BCE, the younger Dryas froze the world. Cultures disappeared and Göbekli Tepe rose, not as a beginning, but as a response. Millennia later, another global shift occurred around 3200 BCE, a mysterious climate anomaly that coincided with the sudden emergence of writing in Sumer, hieroglyphs in Egypt, megaliths in Europe, and organized dynasties in China. Civilizations blooming simultaneously across the world, as if something or someone reignited them. What if these spontaneous births of culture were not isolated miracles of human ingenuity, but recoveries, deliberate acts of remembrance after loss? Each age rebuilding with fragments salvaged from the last. Each new dawn forgetting just enough to believe itself original. There is a haunting rhythm to this pattern. Knowledge expands, reaches mastery, and collapses under its own weight. Floods follow fire. Silence follows knowledge. The survivors scatter, carrying seeds of language, of symbols, of science, which germinate when the earth is ready again. Then the cycle resumes, with just enough continuity to disguise itself as progress. In myth, this recurring amnesia is personified as punishment. The gods erase memory for hubris. The flood washes away sin. But beneath the moral language lies a truth more cosmic than ethical. Entropy demands renewal. The universe itself resets through destruction. Galaxies collide. Stars die to create heavier elements. Perhaps civilization is no different, a repeating wave of creation and collapse, each iteration building on the ashes of the one before. Even in the myths of lost worlds, Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu, Shambhala, there is a strange humility. These places were not paradise, they were warnings. Plato's Atlantis fell because it forgot the gods. The Mahabharata describes weapons of light and thunder, the echoes of forgotten science, unleashed in a war that burned the skies. The Hopi say we live in the fourth world, the three before destroyed by fire, ice, and flood, and to them, the resets are not metaphors but history, the story of how humanity remembers and forgets in equal measure. Science, too, hints at recurrence. Magnetic reversals, solar cycles, orbital precessions, all align with catastrophic climate shift every few millennia. Each time ice melts or returns, seas rise or retreat, and with them vanish entire coastlines where the earliest civilizations once flourished. Our archaeological record, bound to dry land, only sees what remains above the waves. The rest, perhaps the most advanced chapters, lie buried under silt and salt. We find only the after-images, star maps in caves, perfect alignments in megaliths, myths of teachers who came from across the sea after the flood. What we call prehistory may be the prologue of a forgotten world. Even the structure of time seems complicit in this pattern. The precession of the equinoxes, a slow wobble of Earth's axis over 26,000 years, divides history into ages governed by constellations. Ancient astronomers from Egypt to Mesoamerica tracked this motion with uncanny precision. They knew that when the sky shifted, so did the world below. Every 12,000 to 13,000 years, the cycle reaches a tipping point, the same interval that separates our Ice Age ancestors from ourselves. If they saw this as a cosmic clock, then perhaps they expected the resets. Perhaps they even tried to warn us. Some say the pyramids was such a warning. Their alignment with Orion's belt marks the precessional clock at its midpoint, a fixed reminder that time is not linear. Others point to the Sphinx, weathered by rain in a desert where it hasn't rained for thousands of years, as evidence that it predates Egypt's dynasties, a relic of an earlier epoch pulled forward into ours as if to say, remember what comes next. But if history resets, why does it leave traces at all? Why not erase everything completely? Maybe because forgetting must always leave a seed. Total amnesia would end the story. Partial memory allows it to begin again. The survivors, whether human or stone, become carriers of continuity. Each age inherits enough from the last to rebuild, but not enough to prevent hubris. The universe writes its lessons in riddles, ensuring they must be rediscovered rather than preserved. The very institutions that guard knowledge today, universities, churches, libraries, may be echoes of this deeper instinct to protect memory through darkness. Every myth of a hidden archive, from the hall of records beneath the Sphinx to the secret libraries of Tibet, reflects the same hope that when the next reset comes, something will survive to guide the rebirth. Perhaps we are closer to another reset than we wish to admit. The poles shift, the climate warms, and humanity toys again with powers it barely understands. If the pattern holds, the fall is not punishment, only renewal. The question is whether we will recognize the signs in time, or whether we too will become myth, reduced to fragments and whispers for the next world to misinterpret. In the end, the hidden reset is not catastrophe, but continuity. It is the universe's way of ensuring that no civilization, no matter how wise or powerful, can claim to be the first or the last. All of us are only pages in a book that rewrites itself, endlessly, patiently, waiting for someone to remember that the beginning and the end are the same line, drawn over and over in the sand just before the tide returns. There is a silence at the beginning of history that no one can explain, a gap between the end of the Ice Age and the sudden appearance of organized civilization. We fill that silence with speculation, with myth, with comforting ignorance. But perhaps the silence is not absence. Perhaps it is memory, buried too deep to hear. And if that silence could speak, it might tell us that we are not the first. When the world thawed 12,000 years ago, humanity emerged from caves and tundras to build temples and cities that seemed to appear overnight. Agriculture, writing, astronomy, architecture, all arose in astonishing synchrony. The mainstream view calls this the Neolithic Revolution, the dawn of civilization. Yet nothing about it feels like a beginning. It feels like remembering. Fields cultivated with precision from the start. Calendars aligned to celestial cycles far too advanced for trial and error. Myths that speak not of invention, but of restoration. The gods taught us, they say. The gods remembered for us. But who were these gods? In every tradition they come after the flood. Teachers, builders, astronomers, lawgivers. The Sumerians called them the Anunnaki. The Egyptians, the Neteru. The Maya, the Itza, the Andeans, the Viracocha. Even the Aboriginal Dreamtime speaks of sky beings who walked the earth when it was young. To modern ears, these are myths, yet the pattern is too precise to ignore. Every civilization begins with instruction from those who survived something immense. They carry tools, language, and maps of the stars, knowledge that feels inherited, not discovered. Perhaps these gods were not divine at all, but remnants, survivors of a civilization that existed before the ice. A people who watched the world drown, who preserved fragments of their science, who became legends in the eyes of those they taught. Over generations, memory turned to reverence, reverence to worship. The teachers became immortals, and their world, the true first civilization, dissolved into myth. If such a civilization existed, what would it have looked like? Not steel or concrete, not engines or electricity. Those are our languages of progress. Theirs might have been subtler, mastery of stone, sound, and time, a culture that understood the Earth's geometry and the resonance of matter. A civilization aligned to the planet's pulse rather than its conquest. Their monuments, built to survive flood and fire, might still stand. Misinterpreted as tombs or temples, their true function forgotten. Göbekli Tepe, Baalbek, Sacsayhuaman, the Great Pyramid, perhaps all are fragments of a single inheritance, scattered across continents like stars forming an ancient constellation of memory. Science resists such connections because they challenge linear progress. Yet the evidence keeps whispering. Megalithic sites that defy chronology. Artifacts and strata too old for human hands. Legends that speak of suns that rose in different skies, of years when the stars were not as they are now. Even our myths of Eden, a paradise lost through knowledge, sound less like morality tales and more like geological memory. A world before catastrophe, when climate was stable, when humanity lived not as hunter or farmer, but as something in between, advanced yet harmonious. When the balance broke, the world reset. The memory of that balance haunts us still. Every religion carries fragments of its ethics. The idea that harmony with nature is sacred, that hubris brings ruin, that knowledge must be tempered with humility. We've turned these into doctrines, but perhaps they were once scientific truths, instructions left by those who had learned through disaster what not to do. Some theorists speak of a global mother culture, an ancestral civilization that seeded knowledge across the planet long before recorded history. They point to similarities in pyramid architecture, in mythic flood stories, in cosmologies that measure the same celestial cycles. It's not proof, but it is pattern. And pattern is the language of the past trying to reach the present. If such a civilization did exist, it would have known the fragility of memory. It would have encoded its knowledge in forms that could outlast destruction, in symbols, in stone, in myth. Perhaps it even foresaw our age, knowing that we too would reach the same threshold of power and risk. Perhaps every great civilization eventually faces the same test, to remember or to vanish. What if we are already repeating their steps? Our satellites trace the same stars, our machines map the same Earth, our cities rise and sprawl along ancient floodplains once lost to the sea. We build faster than ever, but we listen less. The first civilization may have spoken in harmony. We speak in noise, yet the pulse of that earlier world still beats beneath us, in the geometry of temples, in the music of atoms, in the spiral of DNA. The blueprint is still here. We have simply forgotten how to read it. Maybe the purpose of history is not to learn progress, but to relearn remembrance. The ancients measured time in cycles, not lines, because they knew that forgetting is temporary. What is lost always returns, changed, but not gone. The question is whether we will recognize it when it does. Perhaps that is why their message survived in myth instead of fact. Facts die in flames and floods. Myths endure because they can change shape. A stone crumbles, but a story travels. And through stories, the first civilization still speaks, not to boast, but to warn. This silence that begins history may not be absence at all. It may be the pause between breaths, between worlds, the moment when one age ends and another begins, when memory sinks and imagination rises. And in that silence, if you listen carefully, you can almost hear the echo of a world that knew it would one day be forgotten. A world that built its monuments for ears not yet born. So perhaps the first civilization never truly vanished. It became the foundation for everything that followed, invisible but enduring, like bedrock beneath shifting sand. It lives in the stories of gods, in the symbols carved into stone, in the inexplicable genius of our ancestors who seem to remember things they were never taught. It lives too in us, in our hunger to know, to seek, to remember. And maybe that is the final truth, that humanity itself is the first civilization, endlessly dying and being reborn, each cycle carrying the memory of the last. We are the survivors and the forgotten, the builders and the ruins. The question is not whether the first civilization existed, but whether we will be the last to forget it.